You open the fridge at 11 at night not because you're hungry, but because it's there. You scan the shelves out of habit. You close it again, empty-handed, slightly annoyed that there was nothing to eat, even though there was food. You wonder why you do this. But the real answer is far stranger. Your brain is still bracing for a famine that hasn't come in generations. For most of human history, food wasn't a guarantee. It was a gamble. Picture a small band moving across a dry, cracked landscape. The last hunt failed. The berries are gone. The children are quiet in a way that worries the adults more than crying would. This wasn't a rare event. This was simply a Tuesday, repeated for hundreds of thousands of years. Archaeologist Amanda Henry has spent years analyzing dental plaque and starch grains recovered from ancient teeth. And what she found upends the popular image of the meat-heavy caveman diet. Early humans weren't picky. They ate roots, tubers, insects, tree bark, and grasses long before they ever regularly killed large game. Nothing was wasted, and almost nothing was refused, because refusal was a luxury nobody could afford. So what did people actually do when the primary food sources disappeared? They adapted, constantly. Paleoanthropologist Richard Wrangham has argued that one of the most important survival technologies humans ever developed wasn't a weapon. It was fire, specifically fire used for cooking. Cooking didn't just make food taste better. It unlocked calories that raw food couldn't offer, breaking down tough plant fibers and unfamiliar proteins into something the human gut could actually absorb. When the usual food sources vanished, the ability to cook something previously inedible into something survivable meant the difference between a group persisting and a group disappearing entirely. But cooking alone didn't solve everything. Something deeper had to change first. Your brain had to stop being disgusted by things it would normally reject. Disgust, it turns out, isn't a fixed emotion. It's a finely tuned survival dial, and evolution built it to slide. Psychologist Paul Rozin, who has spent much of his career studying the science of disgust, found that what people find repulsive is shaped enormously by scarcity, culture, and necessity. Foods considered unthinkable in times of abundance become entirely normal, even celebrated in times of hardship. Insects, organ meats, fermented, half-spoiled plants that would be thrown away today. In a famine, disgust doesn't disappear, but it renegotiates. The line of, "I would never eat that," moves, sometimes overnight, because the alternative is far worse than the discomfort of eating something unfamiliar. This is why so many so-called famine foods still exist today, hiding in plain sight as delicacies. Fermented fish sauce began as a way to stretch scarce protein for months without spoiling. Blood sausage transformed an entire animal, including the parts that would otherwise be discarded, into something that could feed a family for days. Foraged greens, considered survival food during hard winters, are now sold at farmers markets for a premium. What began as desperation became tradition. What began as tradition eventually became cuisine. Your ancestors didn't develop a taste for scarcity because they enjoyed suffering. They developed it because the human body and the human mind are remarkably good at converting emergency measures into permanent habits. That single fact might explain more about your own eating behavior than anything a modern diet plan could tell you. Think about your instinct to finish everything on your plate. Think about how strange it feels to throw food away, even food you don't actually want. Think about the small flicker of anxiety that shows up when a cupboard looks close to empty, even if you know rationally that you'll go shopping again in 2 days. None of that is irrational. It's ancestral. Your body doesn't know the difference between the store is closed until tomorrow and there might not be food again for a very long time. It only knows the pattern. Food disappeared before, so treat every disappearance as a possible emergency. Anthropologist Kim Hill, who has studied hunter-gatherer societies extensively, notes that food-sharing networks were often just as important to survival as the food itself. When one family's hunt failed, another family's success covered the gap, with the expectation that the favor would eventually be returned. Starvation wasn't just an individual risk. It was a communal one, managed collectively across an entire group, because no single person's luck could be trusted to hold forever. That's why isolation during scarcity feels so much worse than scarcity itself. Being hungry alone triggered something different in the ancestral brain than being hungry within a group that was actively working to solve the problem together. Modern scarcity rarely looks like a failed hunt. It looks like a smaller paycheck, a delayed grocery run, a fridge that feels emptier than it actually is. But the alarm system reacting to it is exactly the same one that once helped a small band decide whether to eat the bitter root or wait one more day. So the next time you feel a strange pull toward eating everything in the pantry the moment groceries feel low, or an odd comfort in stockpiling food you don't currently need, remember that you're not being irrational. You're running software that was written for a world where the next meal was never guaranteed. The recipe has changed. The fear behind it hasn't. You open the fridge at 11 at night, not because you're hungry, but because some ancient, careful part of you is still checking, out of habit built over hundreds of thousands of years, that the emergency hasn't arrived again.